James Miller stopped dead in his tracks on Elm Street, his postal bag suddenly feeling heavier across his shoulder. The Henderson mailbox at 1247 was overflowing, letters scattered across the lawn like fallen snow, newspapers piling up on the porch for what looked like days. In 12 years of delivering mail to Frank and Eleanor Henderson, he had never not once seen their mail left uncollected. His heart hammered against his ribs. These weren't people who forgot about mail. Eleanor emerged at exactly 7:30 every morning to tend her prize-winning roses. Frank appeared on the porch at 8:15, with his coffee and newspaper. Their mail was collected by 11:30 a.m. with clockwork precision. Something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. The letters scattered on the ground told a story of abandonment. Monday's electric bill, Sunday's church newsletter, Saturday's medical correspondence from Salem Hospital, Friday's bank statement. 4 days. 4 days of Frank Henderson not walking those 15 measured steps from his front door to retrieve the mail that connected him and Eleanor to the world beyond their carefully maintained home. James bent down, examining the postmarks, without disturbing the evidence of crisis. Portland General Electric, Salem Hospital Billing Department. A hand-addressed envelope from their daughter Jennifer in Seattle, the kind of personal correspondence Eleanor would never allow to sit in weather. The morning mist had begun to dampen the corners of the scattered papers. Hours later, 2003, the scars remained from what James would discover. Through the kitchen window, he could see into Eleanor's cheerful, yellow-curtained kitchen, where she washed dishes every morning while keeping watch over her beloved garden. But today, something made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Frank Henderson lay motionless on the kitchen floor near the island, his body positioned at an awkward angle that spoke of sudden collapse rather than peaceful rest. His familiar cardigan was wrinkled and disheveled, suggesting he had been in that position far too long. The silence from the house wasn't the comfortable quiet of people sleeping or occupied in back rooms. This was the heavy, loaded silence of a home where normal life had been violently interrupted. James had delivered mail long enough to recognize the different types of household stillness. This silence screamed of emergency. Meanwhile, across town at Salem Hospital, Eleanor Henderson sat beside an empty bed, unaware that her husband of 53 years was fighting for his life alone on their kitchen floor. She had been recovering from complicated gallbladder surgery for over a week, her own extended stay preventing her from maintaining the daily routines that had kept their household running with precision for decades. Frank had insisted he could manage alone, determined to be strong for Eleanor during her recovery. His pride, the same quality that had made him a beloved high school mathematics teacher for 40 years, had now become his greatest enemy. Back at the house, Elena waited. No, James waited with growing dread, understanding that his next decision would determine whether Frank Henderson lived or died. Without hesitation, James pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. His hands remained steady, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. 12 years of postal service had taught him the critical importance of remaining calm during emergencies and providing clear, actionable information to emergency responders. 911. What's your emergency? This is James Miller, United States Postal Service worker, Fairmount Hill area of Salem, Oregon. 1247, Elm Street. I can see an elderly man lying motionless on the kitchen floor through the window. Multiple days of uncollected mail suggests this residence has been in distress. I believe we have a medical emergency requiring immediate response. The dispatcher's voice carried professional urgency. Sir, we're dispatching emergency medical services and fire department paramedics immediately. Can you determine if the person shows any signs of responsiveness? James pressed closer to the window, shielding his eyes from the morning sun's glare. Negative movement visible from my position. The resident appears to have been down for an extended period based on his positioning and the condition of his clothing. His wife should be living here, but I don't see her in the observable area. Our emergency medical team is 2 minutes from your location. Please remain on scene to provide access and additional information. Those 2 minutes stretched into eternity. James found himself pacing Eleanor's carefully maintained garden pathway, his mind cycling through every interaction he'd had with Frank and Eleanor Henderson over 5 years of daily deliveries. Frank's genuine interest in James's daughter's college progress, Eleanor's homemade cookies during the holidays, their wave from the porch that had become a reliable bright spot in his morning routine. The sound of sirens pierced the suburban quiet like a blade. Salem Fire Department ambulance screamed around the corner, followed by a police patrol car and a second emergency medical services vehicle. Professional, coordinated. Exactly the response Frank Henderson desperately needed. James met the paramedic team at the front walkway. James Miller. The caller. Kitchen window on the south side shows the patient on the floor near the island. Based on mail accumulation patterns, he's been down approximately 3 to 4 days. Lead paramedic Lisa Rodriguez nodded grimly. Any known medical history or current health status? Frank Henderson, 78 years old, generally excellent health, very active in neighborhood maintenance and community support. His wife Eleanor, 76, should be co-resident but isn't visible. This situation represents a complete break from their established daily patterns. The paramedics gained entry within minutes, using professional emergency tools. James remained on the front porch as neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the sirens and the terrible understanding that something had gone wrong in their close-knit community. Mrs. Chen from the adjacent property approached with worry etched deep in her features. "James, what's happening? Are Frank and Eleanor safe?" "Frank's on the kitchen floor. I don't know Eleanor's location yet. Their mail hasn't been collected since Friday." James's voice carried the weight of someone who understood that his attention to detail had potentially made the difference between life and death. The scan space went pale. 4 days. Eleanor waves to me every morning when she tends her roses. I haven't seen her since. She paused, searching her memory. Friday morning. Oh God, I should have noticed. More neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. The Martinez family from across the street, elderly Mr. Kowalski from 2 houses down, Sarah Johnson from the corner house. All connected by the daily rhythms of community life that James had learned to read like a carefully composed symphony. 25 minutes later, paramedic Rodriguez emerged from the house with an expression that mixed relief with gratitude. "Mr. Miller, your quick thinking and decision to investigate potentially saved this man's life. Henderson fell 3 days ago and has been unable to reach communication or call for help. He's severely dehydrated and weakened, but his vital signs are stable. Another day or 2 without intervention could have resulted in a fatal outcome." Relief flooded through James like physical force, releasing tension he hadn't fully recognized he was carrying. Mrs. Henderson's location. Salem Hospital. Routine gallbladder surgery with complications requiring extended stay. Mr. Henderson was managing independently when he fell attempting to retrieve items from a high kitchen cabinet. He's been conscious on that floor for 3 days, unable to summon assistance. Mrs. Chen gasped audibly. "Eleanor's been in the hospital this entire time. Frank must have been so frightened for her, and then this crisis happened." As the paramedics prepared Frank for transport to Salem Hospital, where he would reunite with Eleanor and receive critical medical intervention, James was granted a brief moment to speak with him. Frank's voice emerged weak, but remarkably clear considering his ordeal. "James, thank you. I kept hoping someone would notice, someone would care enough to check when things weren't normal. Eleanor always said you were more than just our mailman. She said you were part of what made this neighborhood feel like genuine community. She was absolutely right." James gripped the elderly man's hand gently. "You focus entirely on healing, Frank. The neighborhood needs both you and Eleanor healthy and home." Frank managed a fragile smile. "I was trying so hard to be strong for Eleanor, to prove I could handle everything during her recovery. Pride, I suppose. Dangerous pride. If I had simply asked for help, you're receiving help now." James said firmly. "That's what matters. Eleanor will be so relieved to see you." Mrs. Chen approached the stretcher with tears flowing. "Frank, we'll take care of everything here. Your garden, your mail, whatever you need, just concentrate on getting well." The story of James Miller's professional vigilance and community care spread through Fairmount Hill within hours, carried by the organic communication networks that exist in neighborhoods where people genuinely care about each other's welfare. What struck everyone wasn't just that he had saved Frank Henderson's life, though that was extraordinary, but how his genuine attention to his neighbor's daily patterns had transformed what could have been a tragedy into a demonstration of community strength. Mrs. Chen called her sister in the adjacent Riverside neighborhood to share the story. Sarah Johnson mentioned it to her Oregon Department of Transportation co-workers. The Martinez family used dinner conversation to teach their teenage children about the importance of paying attention to neighbors who might need assistance. The most significant impact was the immediate transformation of atmosphere within Fairmount Hill itself. James's actions had proven something many residents felt but never articulated. Their postal worker wasn't just someone who delivered mail. He was someone who genuinely cared about their lives and well-being. His decision to investigate and act had revealed countless opportunities for connection and care within their community. Mrs. Chen realized she could have noticed Eleanor's absence from her garden routine. The Martinez family recognized they could have observed accumulating newspapers. Several neighbors acknowledged seeing the overflowing mailbox without taking the crucial next step of checking on resident welfare. Rather than creating guilt, James's example inspired positive community engagement. Neighbors began discussing informal check-in systems for elderly residents. The concept of paying attention to each other's daily patterns shifted from seeming intrusive to being understood as caring and responsible. Later that afternoon, James made a deliberate decision to visit Salem Hospital. His postal route was complete, but he felt personal responsibility to check Frank's condition and provide support to both Frank and Eleanor during this crisis. The drive through downtown Salem, past the Oregon State Capitol building, gave James time to reflect on the morning's significance. In 12 years of postal service, he had always prided himself on thoroughness and care. But today had reinforced his understanding of how crucial his daily presence was in community members' lives. Salem Hospital's main entrance bustled with typical afternoon activity. James approached the information desk with uncertainty. He wasn't family, and hospital visitor policies for just the mailman were unclear. The volunteer, a woman in her 60s wearing a pink hospital jacket, smiled warmly when James explained his situation. "You're the postal worker who found Mr. Henderson. The entire hospital staff has been talking about your quick thinking. Let me check if they can receive visitors." After a brief phone conversation, the volunteer provided visitor badges and directions. Mrs. Henderson was discharged this morning when they learned about the home emergency. She's staying in Mr. Henderson's room to be close to him. 4th floor, room 428. The nurse mentioned they've been hoping you might visit. James took the elevator, carrying flowers from the hospital gift shop. Yellow daffodils and white tulips, chosen because they reminded him of Eleanor's spring garden that brought her such joy. Room 428 was private with large windows overlooking the hospital's courtyard garden. Frank was propped up in bed, connected to IV fluids, restoring his strength after the 3-day ordeal. His color was much improved from that morning, his eyes showing alertness of someone responding well to medical treatment. Eleanor sat beside the bed holding Frank's hand. She wore comfortable clothes rather than a hospital gown, and although tired from her own recent surgery and morning stress, her face lit up with genuine joy seeing James enter. "James." Eleanor's voice carried gratitude and emotion as she stood to greet him. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did this morning. The doctors told us Frank could have, well, your attention to detail and decision to investigate saved my husband's life." James felt embarrassed by the praise while deeply moved by her genuine appreciation. "I just did what anyone would do noticing something wasn't right. How are you both feeling?" Frank reached out to shake James's hand, his grip stronger than that morning, but still reflecting his recent ordeal. "Eleanor and I have been talking this afternoon. We've lived in Fairmount Hill for 28 years. You're the first postal worker, the first service provider of any kind, who ever really saw us as people instead of just another address on a delivery route." "But that's exactly what you are," James replied with sincere conviction. "You're people. You're my neighbors. You're part of what makes my job meaningful. I see Mrs. Henderson working in her garden every morning, creating beauty the whole neighborhood enjoys. I see Mr. Henderson helping people repair fences and bicycles, sharing expertise and time generously. When normal patterns change, when familiar daily rhythms get disrupted, it matters to me because you matter to me." Eleanor wiped away tears that had begun flowing during James's words. The doctor explained that 3 days on that kitchen floor in March weather, with the house getting cold at night and Frank unable to reach water or food, could have led to pneumonia, kidney problems, or worse. Your decision to trust your instincts and take action literally saved his life. Frank nodded slowly. "I kept thinking someone would notice the mail accumulating. Someone would wonder why newspapers weren't being collected. But I realized most people would assume we were traveling, or that checking wasn't their business. You cared enough to make it your business." Their conversation continued nearly an hour, covering Frank's recovery timeline. James learned Eleanor's gallbladder surgery had been complicated by unexpected scar tissue from a previous operation decades earlier, requiring additional surgical time and longer recovery than originally anticipated. "I was so worried about Frank managing alone," Eleanor admitted. "But he insisted he would be fine, that he didn't want me worrying about home responsibilities while dealing with my own recovery. We're both too independent for our own good sometimes." James understood their independence desire. It was part of what he'd always admired about the Hendersons, but he recognized an opportunity to help them consider building support systems that would allow maintaining independence while having safety nets in place. "Have you considered some community support programs available in Salem?" he asked gently. "Not because you need constant help, but because having connections and check-in systems can actually increase independence by providing peace of mind." Frank and Eleanor exchanged glances, the wordless communication that develops between couples married over 5 decades. "We've been pretty self-reliant our whole lives," Frank admitted. "But this experience has shown us that sometimes accepting help and building connections isn't weakness, it's actually wisdom." Over the following weeks, James's actions created ripple effects throughout Salem that no one could have predicted, generating changes extending far beyond the immediate crisis that brought them together. The story reached the Salem Statesman Journal, where reporter Michelle Thompson wrote a feature titled "Postal Workers' Vigilance Saves Neighbor's Life." Oregon Public Broadcasting and regional television stations picked up the article, but more importantly, it sparked conversations throughout Salem and surrounding communities about neighborhood awareness and community connection importance. The Salem Neighborhood Watch Program, operating with modest participation for several years, experienced dramatic increased community involvement. Program coordinator David Kim reported 300% increased attendance at monthly meetings, with residents from throughout Salem requesting information about starting their own watch groups. Local businesses began implementing wellness check protocols for regular customers who suddenly stopped coming in. Tony's Market on Lancaster Drive started keeping informal lists of elderly customers who shopped on predictable schedules, with staff trained to notice extended absences and follow up appropriately. The Fairview Branch Library began similar systems for patrons who typically visited on regular schedules. The United States Postal Service Regional Office in Portland received dozens of letters and emails praising James's actions and requesting that other postal workers throughout Oregon be encouraged to maintain similar awareness of customer well-being and safety. Regional Postmaster Susan Martinez visited Salem to present James with a commendation and discuss implementing formal training programs, helping postal workers recognize signs that residents might need assistance. But the most significant changes occurred within Fairmount Hill neighborhood itself, where James's example had demonstrated the profound impact one person's genuine care and attention could have on an entire community's sense of connection and mutual responsibility. Neighbors who had lived adjacent to each other for years without meaningful interaction began actively connecting and building relationships. Mrs. Chen, inspired by James's example of paying attention to daily patterns, started an informal daily check-in system for elderly residents on Elm Street. Each morning, she made a point of observing whether elderly neighbors' routines appeared normal, whether newspapers had been collected, whether morning lights were on at appropriate times, whether usual activities were proceeding as expected. The Martinez family organized monthly neighborhood barbecues in Fairmount Hill Park, creating opportunities for residents to know each other beyond casual waves and brief conversations that had previously constituted most neighborhood interactions. These gatherings became incredibly popular, with attendance growing from 15 people at the first barbecue to over 60 residents by the fourth month. Young families began coordinating childcare support. Elderly residents started sharing resources and transportation, and the entire neighborhood developed community engagement that had been dormant for years, but waiting for the right catalyst to emerge. James's actions provided that catalyst, demonstrating that caring about neighbors wasn't intrusive or inappropriate, it was essential and valuable. James continued his postal route, with even deeper appreciation for the responsibility and opportunity that came with his daily presence in people's lives. He began carrying a small notebook, a simple composition book purchased at the local drugstore, jotting down normal patterns and routines of his regular customers. When Mrs. Patterson typically collected mail, when the Johnsons' car was usually in their driveway, when the Rodriguez family's violin practice could be heard from open windows, when various neighbors typically had lights on during evening hours. This wasn't surveillance or intrusion. It was thoughtful attention that allowed James to quickly recognize when something in someone's routine changed in ways that might indicate problems or assistance needs. It was systematic application of the caring observation that led him to investigate the Henderson situation, expanded now to encompass his entire postal route. The notebook also became a record of positive community developments. James noted when new families moved into the neighborhood, when elderly residents received visits from grandchildren, when neighbors helped each other with yard work or home repairs. It became a chronicle of community life, reflecting his genuine investment in the well-being of people he served. 3 months after the incident, Frank Henderson was not only back to his old routine of sitting on the front porch during pleasant afternoons, but had expanded his community involvement in ways reflecting his gratitude for care received and desire to contribute to the neighborhood's growing sense of mutual support. His recovery had been complete. Dehydration and weakness caused by his 3-day ordeal had resolved completely with proper medical treatment and rehabilitation. Frank had returned to his longtime practice of helping neighbors with small projects and repairs, but now also served as informal coordinator for community assistance needs. When elderly neighbors needed help with tasks becoming difficult to manage alone, Frank maintained lists of younger residents willing to volunteer time and energy. When families dealt with medical crises or other emergencies, Frank helped organize meal trains and temporary childcare support. Eleanor's garden was not only restored to former beauty, but had become even more spectacular than before. Her recovery from gallbladder surgery had gone smoothly once initial complications were resolved, and she had returned to gardening with renewed enthusiasm and appreciation for the physical activity and creative expression it provided. More significantly, Eleanor had transformed her garden into an even more community-centered resource. She had expanded vegetable sections, and now provided fresh produce not just to 3 elderly neighbors as previously, but to 7 families in the neighborhood, including 2 young families with children, excited to learn about gardening and healthy eating. Eleanor had also started informal gardening workshops on Saturday mornings, teaching interested neighbors about soil preparation, plant selection, seasonal gardening schedules, and sustainable gardening practices. These workshops attracted participants ranging from children to senior citizens, creating intergenerational connections and shared learning experiences that strengthened the neighborhood's social fabric. Their daily mail collection had resumed clockwork precision. Frank emerged every morning at 11:30 a.m. to retrieve mail, examine each piece carefully, and return to the house with his characteristic measured pace. But now this routine carried additional meaning for everyone in the neighborhood. It had become a symbol of resilience, recovery, and the importance of community awareness and care. On a sunny June afternoon, when Oregon summer was beginning to warm days and extend evening light, James was finishing his postal route when Frank called out from the front porch. The sight of Frank sitting comfortably in his favorite chair, looking healthy and content, still brought James deep satisfaction and gratitude for the positive outcome of that worrying March morning. "James, do you have a minute? Eleanor and I would like to discuss something we've been planning." James walked up the familiar brick pathway, the same route he had taken that March morning that changed so much for everyone involved. The pathway was now lined with Eleanor's summer flowers in full bloom, bright red geraniums, purple petunias, and cheerful yellow marigolds, creating a welcoming approach to their front door. "Of course, Frank. How are you both feeling? You're looking excellent." Eleanor emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of iced tea and glasses on a tray, moving with confident energy of someone whose health had been fully restored. She had regained the vigor that made her such an active community member, and her smile carried warmth and genuine happiness that had always characterized her interactions with neighbors. "We're feeling wonderful, thanks to you," Eleanor said, setting the tray down on the small table beside Frank's chair. "But more than that, we're feeling inspired by everything that's happened in our neighborhood since March. The way people have come together, the way everyone is looking out for each other, it's been absolutely remarkable." Frank nodded enthusiastically. "Eleanor and I have been thinking about ways we can help sustain and build on the sense of community that your actions helped create. We want to start a neighborhood newsletter. Nothing fancy or expensive, just a simple way for people to stay connected, share news, coordinate help for those who need it, and celebrate good things happening in our community." "That sounds like a wonderful idea," James replied, genuinely excited about possibilities such a newsletter could create. "The neighborhood has definitely become more connected and supportive since March. Having a formal way to share information and coordinate activities could make that even stronger. We'd like you to be our honorary editor and primary contributor," Eleanor said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm for the project. "After all, you're the one who really knows this neighborhood in ways the rest of us don't. You're the one who sees patterns, who notices changes, who understands what normal life looks like for each family. You've shown us what it means to really pay attention to our community." James felt familiar warmth in his chest that he had experienced 12 years earlier when he first realized that being a postal worker was about much more than simply delivering letters and packages. It was about being a trusted, consistent presence in people's lives, about serving as a connection point between neighbors and the broader world, about caring for the community in ways extending far beyond official job responsibilities. "I would be deeply honored to be part of this project," he said, meaning every word. "I think a neighborhood newsletter could be incredibly valuable for building on the connections that have developed over the past few months." Over the following weeks, planning and development of the Fairmount Hill Community Newsletter became a neighborhood-wide project, engaging residents in ways that exceeded Frank and Eleanor's most optimistic expectations. What started as a simple idea for sharing basic information evolved into a comprehensive community communication system addressing multiple needs and interests. Newsletter planning meetings, held in the Hendersons' living room on Thursday evenings, regularly attracted 12 to 15 residents representing different age groups, family situations, and areas of expertise. Mrs. Chen volunteered to manage the distribution system, using organizational skills developed during 30 years as a high school administrative assistant. The Martinez family offered to handle newsletter design and layout, utilizing their teenage daughter Sophia's computer skills and artistic talents. Sarah Johnson, whose background in nonprofit management provided valuable experience with community communications, took on managing community announcements and coordinating the calendar of neighborhood events. Kowalski, the retired engineer living 2 houses down from the Hendersons, volunteered to write a monthly column about home maintenance tips and seasonal preparation advice. James's contribution to the newsletter became the most anticipated feature among residents throughout Salem, who began requesting copies. His monthly column, titled "What I See on My Route," offered observations about seasonal changes in the neighborhood, recognition of community helpers and volunteers, profiles of interesting community members, and gentle reminders about the small moments of kindness and connection that happen when people choose to pay attention to each other. As months passed, the Fairmount Hill Community Newsletter evolved into something much more significant than its founders had originally envisioned. The 4-page monthly publication became a model for community engagement, attracting attention from neighborhood associations, community development organizations, and local government officials throughout the Pacific Northwest. Other neighborhoods in Salem began requesting copies of the newsletter, eager to understand how the Fairmount Hill community had achieved such remarkable transformation in social cohesion and mutual support. Requests came from Portland neighborhoods, from communities in Eugene and Corvallis, and eventually from as far away as Seattle and Spokane. The newsletter's combination of practical information, community celebration, and gentle encouragement toward neighborly awareness struck a chord with people who recognized the value of strong community connections but weren't sure how to create them. James's monthly column became particularly popular among readers throughout the region. His writing style, accessible, warm, and filled with specific observations about daily life, resonated with people who appreciated his ability to find meaning and connection in ordinary moments. His observations about seasonal changes, recognition of community volunteers and helpers, and gentle suggestions for ways people could support each other created a template that other communities began adapting for their own newsletters and communication systems. The column featured stories of neighbors helping neighbors. Teenagers, like Miguel Rodriguez, volunteering to shovel elderly residents' driveways during the previous winter's unexpected snowstorm. Families, like the Johnsons, organizing meal trains for new parents throughout the neighborhood. Community garden projects, bringing together residents from different generations and backgrounds. It became a celebration of what was possible when people made conscious choices to pay attention to each other's needs and respond with practical assistance and emotional support. Local media attention led to speaking invitations for James at community development conferences, neighborhood association meetings, and professional gatherings of postal workers interested in expanding their role in community building. While James was initially uncomfortable with public recognition, he continued maintaining that he had simply done what anyone should do when noticing something wrong. He gradually came to understand that his story could inspire similar awareness and action in other communities. The newsletter also served practical functions that strengthened neighborhood safety and mutual support. It included monthly calendars of community events, from Eleanor's gardening workshops to Frank's bicycle repair clinics, to the Martinez family's monthly barbecues. It featured community resources sections connecting neighbors with different skills and interests, residents willing to provide tutoring assistance, elderly neighbors who enjoyed spending time with children, families who could offer transportation support, and individuals with specific expertise in areas like home repair technology or financial planning. 1 year after the incident that brought the community together, the city of Salem chose to honor James Miller with the annual Community Service Award, recognizing his quick thinking in the Henderson emergency and ongoing contributions to neighborhood engagement and communication through the newsletter. The ceremony was held at the Fairmount Hill Community Center, a location chosen specifically to emphasize the grassroots, neighborhood-based nature of James's impact. The ceremony attracted over 300 people in attendance, not just residents from James's postal route in Fairmount Hill, but representatives from neighborhoods throughout Salem, Portland, and other Oregon communities that had been inspired by the story of community transformation that emerged from one postal worker's decision to pay attention and take action when something didn't seem right. Mayor Jennifer Harrison, who had followed the Henderson story from initial news coverage through ongoing community development, it inspired, presented the award with remarks emphasizing the broader significance of James's actions. "James Miller represents the very best of what it means to be a community member," she said to the gathered crowd. "His actions remind us that heroism isn't always dramatic or spectacular. Sometimes it's as simple and as profound as paying attention to the people around us, caring about our neighbors' well-being, and taking appropriate action when something doesn't feel right." The mayor's remarks continued with observations about ripple effects of individual caring actions. What James demonstrated through his response to the Henderson emergency is that each of us has the opportunity, every single day, to contribute to the safety, connection, and well-being of our communities. We don't need special training or official positions to make a difference in our neighbors' lives. We just need to care enough to notice when something is wrong and to act on that awareness. In his acceptance speech, James was characteristically humble, deflecting attention from his individual actions toward the community response that had emerged from the crisis. "I want to be clear about something," he said to the applauding crowd. "I just delivered mail and paid attention to my neighbors. Those are simple, ordinary things that anyone can do. But what I learned from this experience is that paying attention, really seeing the people around us, caring about their daily lives and well-being, might be one of the most important contributions any of us can make to our communities." James continued his remarks with reflections on lessons he had learned from the Henderson incident and its aftermath. "Before March, I thought I was just doing my job well. I delivered mail efficiently. I was friendly to my customers. I took pride in my work. But what I discovered is that my job, anyone's job that brings them into regular contact with community members, carries opportunities for service and care that extend far beyond the official job description." He paused to acknowledge Frank and Eleanor Henderson, seated in the front row of the community center, both looking healthy and proud. "Frank and Eleanor taught me that when we choose to really see each other, when we pay attention to the patterns and rhythms of our neighbors' lives, we create opportunities for care and connection that can literally save lives and definitely enrich communities." The audience responded with sustained applause, but James raised his hand gently to indicate he had more to say. "The most important thing I want to share tonight is this. What happened in March wasn't really about me being a hero. It was about all of us, our whole community, learning that we have the power to look out for each other, to notice when something isn't right, and to take action that makes a difference. The real heroes are the neighbors who have embraced that responsibility and made it part of their daily lives." After the ceremony, Frank Henderson approached the podium, where James was receiving congratulations from community members and city officials. The elderly man moved with steady confidence of someone whose health had been completely restored, and his face carried deep satisfaction of someone who had witnessed his community transform into something stronger and more connected. "James, I want to say something to you, and to everyone here tonight," Frank announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the community center. "James saved my life. That's absolutely true, and Eleanor and I will be grateful for that forever. But that's not the most important thing he did for our community," Frank continued, his words carrying weight of someone who had experienced both crisis and recovery, both isolation and community support. "What James really did was show all of us what it means to be a genuine neighbor. He reminded us that we're not just individuals who happen to live near each other, we're a community, and that means we have opportunities and responsibilities to care for each other's well-being." Eleanor joined Frank at the microphone, her presence adding to the emotional impact of their shared testimony. "Before this happened," she said, "I knew the names of maybe 3 or 4 people on our street. I waved politely to neighbors. I maintained my garden. I participated in community life in small ways, but I wasn't really connected to the people around me in meaningful ways." She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were neighbors from Fairmount Hill who had become genuine friends over the past year. "Now I know everyone on our street. We check on each other regularly. We help each other with practical needs. We share resources and time and attention. We've become a real community, not just a collection of houses in the same geographic area. That transformation, that's James's real gift to our neighborhood. The Henderson story and the community transformation it inspired continued to spread throughout Oregon and beyond. 2 years after the initial incident, the Henderson Miller Community Awareness Program was officially launched throughout Oregon, with support from the Oregon Association of Neighborhood Associations, the Oregon Community Development Network, and the United States Postal Service Regional Office. The program was designed to train postal workers, delivery drivers, utility service providers, and other professionals whose work brought them into regular contact with residential communities, to recognize signs that residents might need assistance or intervention. The training covered topics like identifying changes in normal patterns that might indicate health emergencies, understanding appropriate steps for contacting emergency services, recognizing signs of social isolation among elderly residents, and connecting community members with local support resources. Within 3 years of its launch in Oregon, the Henderson Miller Community Awareness Program had expanded to 12 states throughout the Pacific Northwest, Mountain West, and Upper Midwest regions. Program coordinators documented that trained community service providers had successfully identified and responded to 47 emergency situations, including medical crises, home safety hazards, and cases where elderly or disabled residents needed assistance with basic daily activities. More significantly, the program was credited with facilitating thousands of positive connections between neighbors who had previously lived in proximity without meaningful social interaction. Communities that implemented the program consistently reported increased participation in neighborhood associations, higher attendance at community events, and greater willingness among residents to provide mutual support during crises or challenging circumstances. The program's success attracted attention from community development researchers at Portland State University, who conducted a comprehensive study of neighborhoods that had implemented Henderson Miller training, compared to similar communities that had not participated in the program. Their findings, published in the Journal of Community Development and Social Cohesion, documented statistically significant improvements in measures of neighborhood satisfaction, community engagement, and resident well-being in communities where the program had been active for at least 18 months. Dr. Patricia Williams, the lead researcher on the Portland State study, noted that the Henderson Miller program addressed a fundamental challenge in modern American community life: the tendency for people to live in close physical proximity while remaining socially isolated from each other. What this program does, she explained in interviews with community development practitioners, is provide a framework for the kind of informal community care that used to happen naturally in smaller, more connected societies. It gives people permission and structure for caring about their neighbors in ways that feel appropriate and helpful rather than intrusive. The program also influenced policy discussions at state and federal levels about the role of service providers in community well-being and public safety. The Oregon legislature passed a resolution commending the Henderson Miller program and encouraging other states to develop similar initiatives. The United States Postal Service incorporated community awareness training into their national professional development curriculum, reaching postal workers in all 50 states. James Miller, meanwhile, continued his postal route in Salem's Fairmount Hill neighborhood, carrying his notebook and maintaining his careful attention to the rhythms and patterns of the people whose lives intersected with his 6 days per week. His daily routine remained essentially unchanged. He still began his route at the same time each morning, still organized his mail delivery with the same efficiency and care, still took pride in providing reliable, friendly service to his customers. But now his work carried additional dimensions of meaning and impact that extended far beyond the delivery of letters and packages. He had become part of a network of community-oriented service providers who understood that their regular presence in residential neighborhoods positioned them to contribute to community well-being in ways that complemented and enhanced the work of social services, healthcare providers, and public safety officials. His notebook had evolved from a simple record-keeping tool into a comprehensive community resource. In addition to tracking normal patterns that might indicate when residents needed assistance, James now recorded information about community resources, neighborhood volunteers, and opportunities for residents to connect with each other around shared interests or mutual support needs. When new families moved into the neighborhood, James made a point of introducing them to established residents who could help them navigate local resources and become integrated into community life. When elderly residents experienced changes in their health or mobility that affected their independence, James connected them with neighbors who were willing to provide transportation, grocery shopping assistance, or companionship. His monthly newsletter column had become a beloved feature, not just in Fairmount Hill, but throughout Salem, and in the growing number of communities that received copies of the newsletter or had started their own publications based on the Fairmount Hill model. James's writing continued to focus on the small moments of connection and kindness that occurred when people chose to pay attention to each other. But now his observations carried the weight of documented impact and recognized expertise. James still walked his route through Salem's quiet residential streets, still carried the familiar weight of his mailbag across his shoulder, still took pleasure in the seasonal changes that marked the passage of time in the Pacific Northwest. On quiet mornings when the mist clung to the streets and the first light of dawn filtered through the tall evergreen trees that lined the neighborhood, he sometimes paused at 1247 Elm Street to observe the scene that had started everything. Frank was usually on the front porch with his morning coffee by 8:15 a.m., newspaper in hand, ready with his characteristic wave for early commuters and neighbors beginning their daily activities. Eleanor was typically in her garden by 7:30 a.m., tending the flowers and vegetables that continued to be the envy of every gardener in Salem and the source of fresh produce for an even larger network of neighbors than before. Their mailbox was always empty by the time James arrived each day, collected promptly at 11:30 a.m. with the same precision that had characterized their routine for years, resuming the pattern that had been interrupted during that critical week in March. But now James knew that behind that simple routine lay a much larger truth about the power of community awareness and the impact of individual choices to care about others. The mailbox, emptying ritual had become a symbol that extended beyond the Henderson household to represent the broader principles of community resilience, mutual care, and the importance of maintaining routines that connect people to each other and to the larger social fabric of their neighborhood. When people chose to really see each other, to notice patterns, to care about disruptions, to respond with appropriate action when something seemed wrong, ordinary moments could become opportunities for extraordinary care and connection. The mail still got delivered throughout Fairmount Hill every weekday morning. The neighborhood still woke up with the familiar rhythms of suburban life, and daily routines continued to provide structure and predictability for the residents who had made this corner of Salem their home. But underneath these surface patterns, there was now a deeper understanding among community members about their interconnectedness and their shared responsibility for each other's well-being. James's decision to pay attention, to trust his instincts, and to act on his concern for neighbors who seemed to need help had created ripples of connection and care that continued to spread outward, touching lives and strengthening communities in ways that would last for generations. His story had demonstrated that profound social change often begins not with dramatic gestures or large-scale initiatives, but with individuals making small, caring choices in their daily interactions with the people around them. The transformation of Fairmount Hill from a collection of individual households into a genuinely connected community proved that when people choose to notice each other, support each other, and take responsibility for each other's well-being, the results extend far beyond solving immediate problems. Strong communities create environments where people of all ages can thrive, where challenges are met with collective resources and mutual support, and where the normal difficulties of life are buffered by networks of care and connection. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of noticing, caring, and choosing to do what's right even when it might be easier to assume that someone else will take responsibility. Sometimes, a postal worker represents much more than someone who delivers letters and packages. He becomes a symbol of what's possible when people understand that their daily work and regular interactions carry opportunities to contribute to the safety, well-being, and connection of their communities. Sometimes community isn't just a place where people happen to live in proximity to each other. It's something that individuals choose to create through small, repeated acts of awareness and kindness, one caring decision at a time. In Salem, Oregon, and in the growing number of communities influenced by the Henderson-Miller model, people had learned that building strong communities requires nothing more and nothing less than individuals who care enough to pay attention and to act when action is needed. The final truth that emerged from James Miller's story was both simple and profound. Justice had been served not through courts or formal institutions, but through the daily choice that community members made to care about each other's well-being and to respond with practical help when help was needed. The truth that had set them free was the recognition that people matter deeply, that paying attention to each other is both a privilege and a responsibility, and that authentic community is built through countless small interactions characterized by genuine care and mutual respect. Love had conquered not through dramatic rescues or grand romantic gestures, but through the steady, persistent choice that neighbors made to remain present and attentive to each other's daily lives, ready to respond with appropriate action when someone needed help. The healing that had begun with 4 days of uncollected mail, and one postal worker who cared enough to investigate, had grown into a comprehensive model for community engagement that was touching lives throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. In neighborhoods throughout Oregon, and in the growing network of communities that had implemented the Henderson-Miller program, good had indeed found a way to triumph, not over evil or malice, but over indifference, isolation, and the dangerous assumption that someone else would notice when a neighbor needed help. The communities had come together when it mattered most, proving again and again that sometimes the right people show up at exactly the right time, especially when those people understand that being right simply means being present, being aware, and being willing to care about the neighbors who share their daily path through life.